to Fantasy Football Talk. My name is Coach D, and we'll be going over fantasy football for Draftkings, Fanduel, and ESPN. We're going to tell y'all who's starting and who's sitting in this week 3 of the NFL football season. So I'm definitely going to get started with ESPN and NFL fantasy football. So what I'm about to do now is go over who you should sit and who you should start for fantasy football. So just let me get to it real quick because I do have a lot of information to go over. So just give me 1 second here while I go over the starts and sit for fantasy football. If you do have fantasy football or ESPN, I will be going over that as well. So just give me 1 second. I will not be on here long. So let's just go into the quarterbacks for the start. My quarterbacks I feel like you should start is Derek Carr versus the Washington Redskins. Me personally, I feel like this is a good start for a Sunday night slate. And it will definitely show you why you should pick Derek Carr as one of your top quarterbacks in your DraftKings lineup or in your ESPN or fantasy lineup. It definitely should be good for you because, Carr has been on, bandwagon this season. I'm not about to jump ahead to Sunday night's matchup in Washington, but back in week 1, the Redskins surrendered 307 yards. That's just 7 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he gives you, 18 fantasy points, and he's up around there around Carson Wentz. So I think fantasy fans will expect, a similar production from Derek Carr and a potential scoreboard. So I feel like he's going to get his numbers against the Washington Redskins, knowing Breland is not a good corner and Josh Norman is going to be on Amari Cooper. So that opens up for Crabtree. And they have other weapons as far as Jared Cook and Seth Roberts as well that will get the ball, that Derek Carr would get the ball too. Then you have Matthew Stafford versus the Atlanta Falcons. I would start him too. Only reason why I would start him is because, people listed him as sit-em last week, knowing the fact that he finished 17 in fantasy points among quarterbacks. So that was kind of interesting to me as far as what is going on with Matthew Stafford. He will be, the Falcons will be without, the elite passer in Vic Beasley. So Vic Beasley won't be there to be that pass rusher. So Stafford will also have a solid home game throwing, he threw for 26 touchdown passes with 5 interceptions in the last 12 contests at home. So that's pretty impressive to me. So if you want to feel like you want to get a value pick, even in DraftKings, ESPN, NFL fantasy, I'll say go with Matthew Stafford. The third quarterback we're going to go with is Cam Newton versus New Orleans Saints. Now, we all know the New Orleans Saints is definitely a bad defensive team. They give up 396 yards per game every single game, going back to last year's stats. So I'm going back to Cam Newton. I will go back to Cam Newton this week. He's going to be a favorable matchup versus the Saints. No team has allowed more passing yards than the Saints. Let's just be honest. And they give up a lot of fantasy points as well as 28.16 fantasy points per game. So if you want to have a quarterback to go up against the Saints, I'll consider Cam Newton, picking him as well. And I have Dak Prescott versus Arizona Cardinals. Prescott, I listed him as sit-em last week too, knowing that he's going up against a great Denver Broncos defense. And I believe he'll rebound Monday night through, as the Cowboys travel to the West. They will be facing the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals defense has allowed an average of 254 passing yards, and that's 17.96 fantasy points to quarterbacks after 2 weeks. So I feel like Dak Prescott is a definitely valuable pick here. On DraftKings, I think we're going to get into that pricing of what the quarterbacks are. So that would be good for us as well. Just apologize for me because I'm sending everybody here on the Facebook Live But then my fourth quarterback I do have is Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers is going to be going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Kansas City Chiefs, Rivers had a nice start to the season, honestly, throwing for 4 touchdown passes while scoring a combined of 34.92 fantasy points. So that's pretty impressive, knowing the fact with Phillip Rivers, with the weapons that he lacked in a couple years, losing Keenan Allen last year and, Benjamin finally, surging on, and Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry. I really do like his matchup here with the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs, who have surrendered 17.75 fantasy points on defense per game to quarterbacks, it gives Phillip Rivers a chance to put up some good fantasy points here. And they do allow 20 points a game in a position on the road last year. So they do give up a lot of points on the road. So I would like to go with Phillip Rivers if you want to go with a smaller pick and you don't want to go with, spend money to get a higher quarterback. My sleepers I do have this week, I do like Trevor Siemian versus the Bills. The Bills defense is definitely not something that I expect to be this year. So I just feel like with Trevor Siemian, he put up 4 touchdown passes last week. He got the ball to Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas, and he's going to spread it out a little bit. So that's one of my sleepers versus the Bills, knowing the Bills is almost dead last and everything, just like the Saints and the 49ers and other teams. So I do like Alex Smith versus the Chargers. That's going to be an interesting matchup, knowing Alex Smith had the best 2 weeks of his career of this year so far. He beat the Patriots in their home opener, and they beat the Philadelphia Eagles in a close one with Kareem Hunt and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce as his number one target. It really shows that Alex Smith can, still play in this league. He has a position to play for, knowing Patrick Mahomes is there. So I feel like this will be a good matchup for Alex Smith versus the Chargers. And my deep sleepers, I do have deep sleepers will be Jay Cutler versus the Jets. He's in one of my DFS lineups, and the Jets is just not good. Derek Carr put up a lot of fantasy points against him. So I do really feel like with the Jets, he will put up some great fantasy numbers. He gave 15 targets to Jarvis Landry last week and Devontae Parker and those guys. So there will definitely be a good matchup for Jay Cutler and Deshaun Watson versus the Patriots. And reason why I picked this quarterback because the Patriots have not really been good on pass defense at all. They really haven't been good on pass defense. I really feel like with the New England Patriots, they let Alex Smith pass the ball all over them. They had an easy win last week against the Saints, so I'm not really too impressed with their defense. I think Deshaun Watson will have a breakout game versus the Patriots. So I do have them for my deep sleepers. And to sit and the quarterbacks to sit, I'm not going to explain why, but I'm just going to tell y'all who they sit in and who they matchups are. So I'm going with I'm sitting Jameis Winston versus Minnesota. I'm sitting Russell Wilson versus the Tennessee Titans. I'll sit Tyrod Taylor versus the Denver Broncos. Joe Flacco versus Jacksonville. Eli Manning versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Blake Bortles versus the Ravens in London. Andy Dalton versus the Packers. Ben Roethlisberger versus the Bears. Me personally, I really don't see that as I don't really see it as a bust. But I would start Ben Roethlisberger. I don't know why I'll have that information came over to me to sit him, but and Marcus Mariota versus the Seahawks. And that's the teams I have to start and sit for quarterbacks for week 3. Week 3 running backs to start. You have Carlos Hyde versus the Los Angeles Rams. I apologize, Rams. I really apologize. Hyde showed last week that he deserved to be mentioned among the best fantasy running backs in the league. Rushing for 124 yards against the Seahawks in Seattle. Next up today, they have the Rams, who allow a rushing of 147 yards and 3 total scores, and that's the fifth most in PPR points, and that's 30.5 to opposing runners. So I do like that matchup with Carlos Hyde versus the Rams. We do have Ty Montgomery versus the Cincinnati Bengals, and Ty Montgomery listed as a stardom this week. He went off with 6 catches for 110 scrimmage yards, scored two times, and a 29 PPR points in the loss to the Falcons. They do have the Bengals this week, and who have allowed the third most rushing yards, 128 rushing yards, and average more than 24 PPR points per contest to the runners of the first 2 weeks. So I do feel like with Ty Montgomery versus the Bengals, this would be a good matchup for him. If you want to put him in your Fanduel or your Draftkings lineups, then you could do that. You would get him for a nice price. So I'm going to go over my lineups in a little bit once we get through all the positions for NFL and fantasy, NFL and ESPN. We do have CJ Anderson versus the Buffalo Bills, which this is very interesting to me. I really do like this matchup with CJ Anderson, knowing he had a breakout game last week versus the Dallas Cowboys. Anderson is coming off a 2-touchdown game, and that's 27.4 point performance against the Cowboys, which snaps a 71%, and torched them for 49 total, indicating that he used as a feature back. I feel like he should be a feature back. He should be the number one back, and the backup should be Jamal Charles. And then you have the Bills, who surrender an average of 28 PPR points per game to running backs at their home field last season. So that really shows you that the Bills is not really that good as far as with their running game. And the next one I do have up here is Christian McCaffrey versus the New Orleans Saints. And I have Christian McCaffrey as one of the top running backs because they're going up against a Saints team that's really not that great. So I really do like this this matchup here with Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey ranked a disappointing 26 at PPR fantasy points among running backs after 2 weeks. Only reason why I feel like that's happening, because he's not getting the ball enough with with Jonathan Stewart being there, and he's being the feature back. But I feel like he should shine this week against the Saints. Their defense has allowed the third most PPR points. They average a total of 36.5 points per game to running back so far within 3 weeks. So I will start Christian McCaffrey. No other team than the Falcons had allowed more catches, and that's 19 to the position. So I do like Christian McCaffrey in this lineup. So I will go with him as well. The next one I do have is Javaris Allen versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Allen has come out of nowhere to become the quite valuable asset for fantasy footballers. He leads the Ravens in the backfield of 75 snaps and 40 touches, and he'll continue to see work when the team travels to London to face the Jaguars. While their defense is improved in this unit, they had allowed 22.85 PPR fantasy points to running backs. Javaris Allen is filling in for Danny Woodhead, and Danny Woodhead is going to be out for a while with a hamstring injury. And I just feel like with this game here that Javaris Allen is going to get, I'll say about 15 to 17 fantasy points. Jacksonville Jaguars running game is not really that good to me. I think they have great corners that will pass the ball, so I do like them better. But I do like this stardom. If you want to start Javaris Allen versus the Jaguars, I prefer for you to do it. So let's go into a few more. You got Mike Gillislee versus the Texans. You have Tevin Coleman versus the Lions. And that was my sleepers. And my deep sleepers are Theo Reddick versus the Falcons and Jonathan Stewart versus the Saints. My sit-em, I do have running backs that I'll prefer for y'all to sit this week. I would say sit Thomas Rawls versus the Tennessee Titans. Most likely Chris Carson is going to get the start there. He had been more productive. Sit Mark Ingram versus Carolina. Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson is fighting for touches right now, so I wouldn't see me, starting him. Joe Mixon versus Green Bay. I really don't agree with this Joe Mixon versus Green Bay. Joe Mixon in the first 2 weeks had a great solid 2 games in the first 2 weeks. And I see what, Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman was able to do with the Packers on Sunday night. But they have veterans like Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard, that can see the share of work. So I in a way I kind of understand why they picked Joe Mixon not to start. Don't start Rob Kelly versus the Oakland Raiders. Don't start LeGarrette Blount versus the New York Giants. And a few busts that's going to happen at running back is Paul Perkins at Eagles, Matt Forte at Dolphins, DeMarco Murray versus Seahawks. We all know that Derrick Henry is going to get the workload there. And Leonard Fournette versus the Ravens. We're going to go to wide receivers. And wide receivers that we do have, I'm just go down the list of them. Doug Baldwin versus Tennessee. This is the wide receivers to start. So this is the wide receivers to start. I do have Doug Baldwin versus Tennessee. I do have Devontae Parker versus the New York Jets. I do have Kelvin Benjamin versus the New Orleans Saints. I do have Terrell Pryor versus the Oakland Raiders. I do have Adam Thielen versus the Buccaneers. Jermaine Kearse versus the Dolphins. Rashard Higgins at the Colts. And Jerron Brown versus the Cowboys. Now I'm going to get back into Keenan Allen versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Allen had looked no worse for where after the major knee reconstruction, it ranked him 6th in PPR points among wideouts while playing on 87% of the Chargers' offensive snaps this season. His success should continue versus the Chiefs, who have allowed an average of 39.1 PPR points to receivers, and that's that's the third most points. The third most points in against number ones. And then you have Doug Baldwin versus the Tennessee Titans. You do have him where I really don't like this start, but the Titans have allowed 3 touchdowns to the 5th most PPR points, and that's 40.1 points a game to wideouts this season, and their defense has surrendered an average of 15.9 points to opposing number 1 receiver. So I kind of like this sit, but in a way I really don't. Devontae Parker to the New York Jets. I love Parker. I think he's going to have one of the season's breakout fantasies in this week. He was on the field 90% of the time of the snaps and saw 8 targets last week from Jay Cutler. He loves to throw the ball to Parker. He calls him faster than Alshon Jeffrey. And Parker looks to shine versus the Jets defense that gave up so much. That gave up so much in fantasy. My sit-em, I do have Alshon Jeffrey versus the Giants, DeAndre Hopkins versus New England Patriots, Jeremy Maclin versus Jacksonville, Sammy Watkins versus the 49ers, Marvin Jones versus the Atlanta Falcons, Allen Hurns versus the Ravens, Jordan Matthews versus Broncos, Amari Cooper at Redskins, and T.Y. Hilton versus Browns. That's all the sit-ems for the wide receivers. If you're playing in ESPN or you're playing in NFL fantasy. The next ones we're going to go to here, we're going to go to tight ends. And then after that, I'm going to go straight into my Draftkings lineups. So I'm going to go with starting tight ends you should pick this week is Zach Ertz versus the Giants, Kyle Rudolph versus the Buccaneers, Jason Witten versus Arizona Cardinals, Jack Doyle versus the Cleveland Browns, Austin Hooper versus Detroit, Martellus Bennett versus the Bengals, Evan Ingram versus the Eagles, Jared Cook at Redskins, and Ed Dickson at Saints. So for Zach Ertz, it is hot. I apologize, y'all. For Zach Ertz, Ertz has continued his streak of PPR success last week, recording 5 catches and 14.7 fantasy points against the Chiefs. Second in targets behind Jason Witten among tight ends after 2 weeks, and the veteran should remain active in lineups versus the Giants defense, who had allowed 18.9 fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Kyle Rudolph versus the Buccaneers. Then you have Rudolph just put up 8.5 PPR points with Case Keenum under center, but he was on the field 95% of the Vikings offensive snaps and saw a team high of 6 targets. And it'll be a better option when Sam Bradford, comes back into the lineup. So it should be a very good, interesting if Bradford could come back. And then you have Jason Witten versus the Arizona Cardinals, where I really like this matchup. I'm going to go and jump back on this bandwagon again. Jason Witten leads all tight ends in targets, catches, and fantasy points after 2 weeks. He also a strong matchup versus the Cardinals defense, who allowed 15.9 PPR points to Jack Doyle just in 1 week. So I do like this matchup. Arizona Cardinals defense is not the same like it used to be. So I'm not really liking Arizona's defense. So if you do have them in your lineup, I would not start them this week, knowing they going to be coming off a bounce back game after the loss to the Denver Broncos. Then I have Jack Doyle versus the Cleveland Browns, where you have Doyle got back into the good graces of fantasy football owners last week, posting 8 catches on 8 targets for 79 yards. And that was a 15.9 PPR points against the Cardinals. He'll be in position to post another nice line against the Browns, who have allowed an NFL high of 19 catches and an average of 23.7 points per contest to tight ends this season. Then you have Austin Hooper versus the Detroit Lions. And Hooper has been up and down in the first 2 weeks of the season. But I think he'll trim back up in a positive direction in a matchup against the Lions. Their defense has allowed 14.7 PPR points to Evan Ingram, last week on Monday night. So not to mention the average of 14 PPR points to tight ends in their home field a season ago. So I do like these ones as far as who I like on a fantasy level. So right now I have to start them. I have Zach Ertz, Kyle Rudolph, Jason Witten, Jack Doyle, Austin Hooper, Martellus Bennett, Evan Ingram, Jared Cook, and Ed Dickson. There are my stardom for the tight end position. And the tight ends I should sit this week. I will sit Tyler Eifert. I will sit Antonio Gates. Cameron Brate. I will sit Cameron Brate. David Anoku. I don't think he's really going to do well with that Indianapolis Colts defense. They're not really that good, but I really don't see him doing anything. Gerald Everett. So, and the other ones I do have is Julius Thomas versus the Jets, Ben Watson versus the Jaguars, Jimmy Graham versus the Titans, and Eric Ebron versus the Falcons. That is my sit-em for week 3 for the tight end position. Defense, I'm just going to go over. I'm not going to explain why, but I'm just going to go over a quick defense to start. You can start the New England Patriots versus the Houston Texans, Green Bay's defense versus the Bengals, the Ravens D versus Jacksonville Jaguars, Philadelphia Eagles defense versus the Giants, the Rams defense versus the 49ers, which will be Thursday Night Football tonight at 8:30 p.m. on NFL Network. You have the Steelers versus the Bears, Do you have a deep sleeper where you have the Colts versus the Browns and the Dolphins versus the Jets? And defense to not start. I prefer you not to start any of these players. Ed Dickens should be a start and a great waiver wire to pick up, and Olsen is out. Absolutely. Absolutely. I do have him on my stardom lineup. I do have him in my few lineups on Draftkings. But I think he's going to get touches. But I feel like it's going to be a breakout game for Kelvin Benjamin and a breakout game for Christian McCaffrey. Because Ed Dixon, I think he's a rookie. I'm not sure. But he's definitely a great valuable pick as far as picking him up as well. So you do have defenses that you don't want to start. You don't want to start the Redskins over the Oakland Raiders. You don't want to start Houston over New England. You don't want to start the Panthers over New Orleans. And you don't want to start Buffalo over Denver. You don't want to start the Cardinals at Cowboys, Lions at Falcons, Seahawks versus Titans, and Chiefs versus Chargers. They are the teams that you do not want to start. The defense that you do not want to start in your week 3 lineup. And I'm going to go to the last but not least, I'm going to go to kickers real quick so we can go to the DraftKings lineups and get this done and over with. So the DraftKings, NFL, if you play NFL or you're playing ESPN, these are the kickers that you want to start. You want to start Giorgio Tavicchio, the kicker from the Oakland Raiders. The kicker from the Chiefs, you want to kick Cesaro Santos. You want to start Graham Gano versus the Saints. You want to start the kicker Nick Folk versus the Minnesota Vikings. You have your sleepers at Dustin Hopkins versus the Raiders, Chris Boswell at the Bears, and your deep sleepers are Jake Elliott versus the Giants and Zane Gonzalez versus the Colts. The kickers that you should sit this week is Adam Vinatieri, Phil Dawson, Stephen Hoshka, Chandler Canizero, Jason Myers, Kai Forbath, Will Lutz, and Robbie Gould. So for ESPN and NFL lineups, you definitely that's all the lineups that you should start and sit in a. Okay. Matt Bryant, I'll say start Matt Bryant. Me personally, yeah, I think you should start Matt Bryant. He's very good of a kicker, and they're going to put up a lot of points against the Lions. Me personally, I really like how Matt Bryant's out. Yes, keep Matt Bryant in. That's just clutch right there. ESPN and fantasy play, and I play Yahoo, so give it to me. You on it. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I did go over ESPN fantasy, and you can use that for Yahoo as well. And just to let y'all know, please comment, like, and subscribe. Please share this video with everyone. And we're going to kick off my personal DraftKings lineups. I'm going to go with my first lineup that I picked out. And the first lineup that I picked out, my first person, I picked that quarterback. I think he's a very valuable quarterback, and I think he's going to shine. And I picked up Carson Wentz at 5,900. And the reason why I picked up Carson Wentz at 5,900 is because he's a great valuable pick. And he's just been great for the last 2 weeks. His last game, he was 25 for 46, 333 yards and 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He gave me 28.8 DraftKings points. So I do like him as well. For Carson Wentz, I do like him at quarterback. He's a great pick. He's still low owned. He's been low owned for the last 2 weeks, and I do like him at running back. I mean, not running back, quarterback. I apologize. My running back, I picked up C.J. Anderson, and he was 5,800. And the reason why I picked him up because he's going up against the Buffalo defense that's just not good. He's just not good. Like, they're just not really, impressive to me to actually do something, against him. So I do like C.J. Anderson at 5,800. I do have Jay Ajayi at 7,700. I think he's going to have a great game versus the Jets, and he really turned out to be a very good running back in this league. And he had a great stat last week. I mean, they say that he's questionable this week, but I think he's going to play. If he doesn't play, then I'll go with a different running back. But he had 28 attempts for 122 yards and 2 receptions for 4 yards, and he gave you 17.6 DraftKings points. So that was really impressive to me. And he's going to put up bigger numbers if he plays this week versus the Jets. And the next one I do have up here or my lineup, I do have Jarvis Landry at 6,800. I do love this pick. I really do love this pick at Jarvis Landry at 60. I think it's 6,800. Yeah, it's 6,800. I do like this pick because he had 15 targets last week against the Chargers. So I feel like with this lineup, he's going to do even better against the Jets. I think he's going to go over the 100-yard mark. His stat was really good. He's questionable as well, but I still think he's going to play. He had 13 receptions for 78 yards. He didn't have no touchdowns, but he still gave you 20.1 DraftKings points. That was really impressive to me. The next person I do have as my wide receiver, I do have Jermaine Kearse. And Jermaine Kearse, he's been doing very well this year, honestly. I do like Jermaine Kearse. And he's at 4,600. And I do like him as well because he gives you a lot of points when it's needed. We all know the Jets is going to be down every single year. We know the Jets is going to be down every single year. So we already know how that's going to work with getting the ball to Jermaine Kearse. He was really good last week. He had five targets, but he had 4 catches for 64 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. That was 22.4 DraftKings points. So that was really impressive to me. I really think that's the Jets' number 1 target. That's McNow's number 1 target. So I do like it as well. Wow, how do DraftKings fantasy go? Do you draft every week? Sorry to interrupt. LOL. Fantasy DraftKings work is daily is every week. You pick up a lineup every week, and they give you a salary to pick from. So you gotta go. They give you a $50,000 salary, and you gotta pick players and start your lineup within that budget. So everybody has a different budget. They go high, they go low. But DraftKings is really good. They even have a new pick 'em where you don't have to use a salary and you just pick players by tier. So I'll get more into that on another video. But my next pick that I do have is Jack Doyle. No, not Jack Doyle. It's Martavius Bryant. I do have him in my DraftKings lineup. I do love this pick at 5,700. He had a breakout game last week for 4 targets but 3 receptions for 93 yards, and he gave you 18.8 DraftKings points. He's going to have a big game. He's going to have a big game against the Chicago Bears corners that I think that's so not impressive to me. So if you want to try out DraftKings, please just try it out for free. They do have free games on there. You do pay for some, but you don't pay for all. But I do like Martavius Bryant here. I don't like the Bears defense, so I think this is a great pick at 5,700 for Martavius Bryant. I do have Jack Doyle at 3,600. Great value pick. I mean, I decided to pick him up in my ESPN and NFL fantasy as well, and I think he's a great pickup at 3,600. I do have Christian McCaffrey at 6,100. I do like Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be a great game with the Saints. And I have the Broncos defense at 5,600. That is my lineup for week 3. I do have other lineups as well. My other lineups that I have Deshaun Kaiser at 5,000. Derrick Henry at 5,300, James White at 5,400, Antonio Brown at 9,000, Emmanuel Sanders at 5,800, Mohamed Sanu at 4,500, Zach Ertz at 5,000, Devontae Parker at 6,300, and the Steelers at Steelers defense at 3,400. And my third and final lineup I do have is Cam Newton versus the Saints, 6,600. Ty Montgomery at 6,900. Jonathan Stewart at 4,700. Crabtree at 7,400. Jordy Nelson at 7,800. Kenny Stills at 4,400. Jared Cook at 3,100. I do have Derrick Henry at 5,300. And the Dolphins defense, let me go to it because I didn't get a chance to go to it. And the Dolphins defense is at 3,700. So these are my picks for NFL fantasy football. My name is Coach D, and I need y'all to like, comment, and subscribe to the video and share it as much as you can. My name is Coach D, and I see y'all next week with Week 4 picks. Have a good time watching Thursday Night Football, which will be on tonight. The Rams versus the 49ers at 8:30 on NFL Network. So, like I said again, comment, like, and subscribe. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments below, and I will get right back to you with all the answers. Have a good day. Peace.